I noticed from the comments, both from my book, Sugar Crush, and from my podcast, Sugar Crush, and now the rest of the story, that why a podiatrist is talking about all these devices such as Apollo Neuro, or Blink, or neurosurgery, or other diseases outside my field. And that's a question I get every day, and it's a natural question. So my training was so different than the average allopathic physician. And what do I mean by that? Well, the field of podiatry is the lower extremity, the foot, ankle, and leg. But the foot, ankle, and leg people have arteries, nerves, and veins, and bones, and tendons. So we have to learn the physiology of those disease states. And the number one disease state in the lower extremity in the Western world is diabetic neuropathy. So that's a viewpoint that I have from gangrene, amputations, and malfunction of the human locomotor system. But it's a system. It's an organ system. So doctors such as cardiologists or neurologists that work on the brain or general surgeons, they are very specific in their approach to disease. Let's take gallbladder disease. When you have a malfunctioning gallbladder, they take the gallbladder out. They don't really give it any thought as why they're doing it. They're very good technicians in doing it. No one ever said to you how to prevent gallbladder disease. No one ever told you how to prevent glioblastomas, which is a brain tumor. No one ever told you how to prevent any of these diseases because doctors generally are not trained in prevention. They are in the pathology repair business, as I was as well. But when you see gangrene and amputations, by the way, there are 1.5 million amputations every year throughout the world. 1.5 million. Just do the math on that. In the last 40 years, it's like 60 million amputations. It's mind-boggling. I was fortunate that a peripheral nerve surgeon by the name of A. Lee Dellon out of Johns Hopkins was giving a lecture in Scottsdale about 25 years ago. And I was there, and I went up to him after he gave his lecture on how to correct diabetic peripheral neuropathy, which means taking the nerves, opening up the canals that the nerves go through, and releasing the pressure. Now, he was a professor in neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. He also was a trained plastic surgeon. Now, this is a surgeon, and this is his training is from 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, doctors who had training in plastic surgeon did the original carpal tunnel. And that's what he did. And one day, a patient said to him, Dr. Dellon, you fixed my carpal tunnel and my ulnar tunnel at the elbow. Why don't you fix my leg? And he said, because that's a different disease. That's diabetic neuropathy. But he thought about it, went to the laboratory, and found the tunnels in the lower extremity that were what we call in medicine homologous, meaning like the upper extremity, like the lower extremity. Very logical. Published his first paper in 1984. He wrote a textbook about like that. He said to me, read my textbook, come down to Johns Hopkins, and I will train you in the surgical procedure of reversing diabetic neuropathy. That's how I got started in the answer to the question why a podiatrist is talking about all these other diseases. Well, I learned the procedure from him, brought it back to Scottsdale. At that time, I was running the wound care center at Scottsdale Healthcare's local hospital. And I introduced that concept, and I did not have any amputations because it's that simple. A nerve is compressed. A nerve is compressed in the lower extremity. We just call them different names: carpal tunnel, tarsal tunnel, diabetic neuropathy. And then one day I said to Dr. Dellon, I think there's more to your theory. And he said, why don't you figure it out? And I was reading outside of my training and found a doctor at Stanford in about the year 2005 who had written an article in the Journal of Circulation. His name is John Cook. It's Cook with an E. He's a cardiologist by training, has a PhD in vascular biology, and was studying one molecule, asymmetric dimethylarginine. Now, why did that strike my eye? Not because of that word, but it was called the Uber marker, meaning it was the solution to all nerves. I text him and I said, Dr. Cook, Dr. Dellon has a theory. I think your theory fits his. He called me on the phone 2 hours after I texted him and said, I like your idea. No one had thought of that. Come up to Stanford, work with me, which I did. We figured out that his patients, or my patients actually, with his molecule, had a systemic effect with that molecule, from MS to carpal tunnel to all sorts of different neurologic diseases. And it makes sense. Why a podiatrist? Because I was seeing a very sick subset of people. And as I said, and I say today, the clarion sound of pain in the lower extremity, which is extremely painful, and losing your leg is a clarion sound that the rest of your body is being affected by the effects of sugar. And that's why I wrote the first book, Sugar Crush, to detail this connection from my field to other doctors.